Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The stars looked different from Karnath. Jonathan Grant stood on the dusty ridge, staring into the endless sky where constellations blinked coldly, their light reaching this forgotten corner of the galaxy. As the wind whipped his worn jacket, he clenched his fists. This wasn't Tree where he was supposed to be. Once the president of Earth, Sith United Federation, the youngest in a century, he had stood tall among galactic leaders. Now he was nothing more than a prisoner, exiled to this desolate planet after the crushing defeat in the Interstellar Council election. Karnath was a barren wasteland, its cracked soil and jagged mountains stretching endlessly. It was a place for the forgotten, those who had dared to challenge the authority of the Interstellar Alliance and lost. Exiled here with nothing but the clothes on his back, Jonathan had been left to rot. But he wasn't going to let that happen. He was still Jonathan Grant, and the fire inside him had not yet dimmed. "Grant, we need to move," a voice interrupted his thought. Jonathan turned to see Soren, a former diplomat who had been sent to Karnath years before him. Soren Sand's face was weathered, his eyes sharp, but there was a glimmer of hope in them, now something that had been absent when they first met. The ex-diplomat had been instrumental in helping Jonathan survive these past few months, navigating the treacherous terrain and the even more dangerous social dynamics of the planet. "The patrols are getting closer. If they find us, we're very dead to," Soren added, his voice low but urgent. Jonathan nodded, pulling his jacket tighter against the biting wind. The Overlord's forces had been tightening their grip on the population, hunting down any sign of rebellion with ruthless efficiency. The alien regime on Karnath was brutal, and the people had been living under its iron fist for too long. But Jonathan wasn't here to simply survive, he was here to lead. As they descended the ridge, they moved quickly but cautiously through the rocky terrain. Karnath's twin moons cast long shadows, making it easier to blend into the landscape. They were heading to one of the underground hideouts where the local resistance had been gathering strength. Jonathan had spent weeks earning the trust of the various factions, a difficult task in a place where trust was a rare commodity. At the entrance to a hidden cave, a tall figure stepped forward. Mara, the leader of the Karnathian resistance, eyed Jonathan with her usual suspicion. She was fierce, her pale skin and silver eyes giving her an almost ethereal appearance. Her people had suffered under the rule of the Interstellar Alliance for generations, and trust did not come easily to her. "You were late," Nara said, her voice as cold as the night air. Jonathan met her gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "We had to avoid the patrol." Nara grunted, but said nothing more as she led them deeper into the cave. Inside, the resistance members were huddled around small fires, their faces gaunt from years of hardship. They were a motley crew: humans, Karnathians, and several other alien species, all united by one thing: their hatred for the Overlord Zero. Jonathan scanned the room, noting the tension that filled the air. The resistance was growing, but so were the risks. Each day, the Overlord Soth forces grew more ruthless in their pursuit of the rebel. Time was running out, and they needed a plan, one that would strike a blow so severe that it would shatter the Overlord's scent control. "We have news," Nara said. Addressing the group, "The Overlord's supply convoy is moving through the northern pass tomorrow night. If we hit it, we can disrupt their operations for weeks." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, but Jonathan remained silent, his mind working through the possibilities. A convoy raid would help, but it wasn't enough. They needed something bigger, something that would send a message, not just to the Overlord, but to the entire galaxy. "We can just disrupt them," Jonathan said, his voice cutting through the room. "We need to cripple them. We need to strike at the heart of their power." Nara narrowed her eyes. "And how do you suggest we do that, human? We were barely holding on as it is." Jonathan stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "The Overlord's stronghold? That's kind of where we need to go. If we take that, we take Karnath." The room fell silent. The idea was audacious, bordering on suicidal. The Overlord's stronghold was a fortress heavily guarded by advanced alien technology and soldiers who showed no mercy. But Jonathan had learned one thing during his time on Karnath. The people here had nothing left to lose. "We have the element of surprise," he continued. "They want to expect a direct assault. If we can get inside, we can disable their defenses and turn their own weapons against them." Nara's expression softened slightly, though skepticism still lingered. "It's a bold plan, but bold plans have a tendency to get people killed." Jonathan nodded. I know the risks, but if we don't act now, we'll be hunted down one by one. This is our chance to take control of Karnax's future. Soren, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. Jonathan says, right. The longer we wait, the stronger they become. We need to hit them where hurt. After a long pause, Nera sighed. Fine, but if this goes wrong, it's on you, human. Jonathan didn't flinch. He had made bigger gambles before, and this time he was betting everything. As dawn approached, the resistance forces began to gather. Jonathan stood with Soren at the edge of the encampment, watching as the various factions prepared for the assault. The air was thick with tension, but beneath it all, there was a sense of determination. They knew the odds were against them, but they also knew this was their only chance. Nara approached, her expression unreadable. The plan is set. We'll hit the convoy as a distraction, while you and a small team infiltrate the stronghold. Jonathan nodded. Let's do this. With the sun barely rising over the jagged horizon, the rebels moved out. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his focus. There was no room for fear now. They had prepared for this moment, and they couldn't afford to hesitate. As they approached the northern pass, Jonathan could see the convoy in the distance, a line of alien transport vehicles carrying supplies and reinforcement. The resistance fighters were positioned along the ridges, ready to strike at a moment's notice. With a signal from Nara, the first wave of attacks began. Explosions lit up the sky as the resistance launched their assault, catching the convoy by surprise. Alien soldiers scrambled to defend themselves, but they were no match for the rebels' coordinated strike. While the convoy battle raged, Jonathan led his team toward the stronghold, moving swiftly through the rocky terrain. The stronghold loomed in the distance, a massive structure built into the side of a mountain. Its high walls and defensive turrets made it nearly impenetrable, but Jonathan had a plan. As they reached the outer perimeter, Jonathan pulled out a small device, a piece of technology they had acquired from Lyris, the alien scholar who had once worked for the Overlord. It was a key to the stronghold's defense systems, a piece of tech that would allow them to disable the security grid long enough to get inside. This better work, Soren muttered as Jonathan activated the device. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lights on the perimeter fence flickered and went dark. We rest, Jonathan said, leading the way. The stronghold was eerily quiet as they moved through its corridors, the alien architecture unfamiliar and unsettling. They encountered little resistance at first, but Jonathan knew it wouldn't last. The Overlord's sources would soon realize what was happening, and when they did, all hell would break loose. As they approached the central control room, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Jonathan motioned for his team to take cover, and they waited in silence as a patrol of alien guards passed by. Once they were cleared, they continued forward, their goal within reach. Inside the control room, they found the heart of the Overlord power, a vast array of monitors and control panels, overseeing every aspect of life on Karnak. Jonathan moved quickly, accessing the systems with the codes Lyris had provided. This is it, Jonathan said. We disabled their defenses and the stronghold is ours. Just as he began to input the final sequence, the door behind them burst open. Alien soldiers stormed in, weapons drawn, and chaos erupted. Jonathan ducked behind a console as blaster fire filled the room. Soren, cover me, Jonathan shouted frantically, working to finish the override. Soren fired back at the soldiers, buying Jonathan the time he needed. With a final keystroke, the entire system went offline, and the stronghold's edge defenses were disabled. Go now, Jonathan yelled, and the team bolted from the control room, racing to escape before reinforcements arrived. As they sprinted through the corridors, the alarms blared to life. Red lights flashed, casting an ominous glow on the metallic walls as Jonathan and his team navigated the maze of passages. They could hear the sound of alien reinforcements closing in from all sides. The air was thick with tension, but Jonathan kept his focus. There was no turning back now. The stronghold's defenses were down, but they still had to escape. Nara's voice crackled over the communicator. We've secured the outer perimeter. Get to the extraction point. Now, Jonathan did respond. He knew time was running out. Behind him, Soren covered their retreat, firing sporadic shots to keep the alien guards at bay. The soldiers were relentless, their heavy boots pounding on the cold metal floors as they pursued the intruder. "We were not going to make it at this pace," Soren shouted, his breathing labored. Jonathan glanced around, searching for an alternative route. His eyes landed on a ventilation shaft just ahead this way. He called, motioning for his team to follow. Without hesitation, they scrambled inside the narrow passage, crawling through the confined space as the sound of footsteps grew louder behind them. The shaft led them to the outer edge of the stronghold, where a large access hatch opened onto a rocky plateau. As Jonathan emerged, he could see the resistance forces gathering in the distance. Narasar's fighters had taken control of the outer defenses, and now the battle was raging at the gates of the stronghold itself. They had to keep moving, the hatch sealed behind them just as alien soldiers reached the corridor, their weapons blasting into the metal. But the team was already making their way down the steep incline toward the resistance line. Nara met them halfway, her face smeared with dust and sweat. "You did it," she said, barely concealing her surprise. "We're reholding the perimeter, but reinforcements are coming. We don't have much time." Jonathan nodded. "We need to press the advantage. The stronghold is vulnerable. Now we hit them hard before they can regroup." Nara hesitated, glancing back at her fighters. They were exhausted, many of them injured, but the determination in their eyes hadn't faded. They knew what was at stake. "All right," she said, gripping her weapon tightly. "We hit them now." With that, the final assault began. The resistance fighters surged forward, their battle cries echoing across the barren landscape as they clashed with the Overlord's remaining forces. Jonathan fought alongside them, his mind sharp despite the chaos around him. Every move was calculated, every strike purposeful. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for freedom, not just for the humans exiled to Karnath, but for every species oppressed under the alien regime. As the battle raged on, Jonathan found himself face to face with High Overlord Dra. The alien leader stood atop a platform towering over the battlefield. His armored form gleamed under the harsh light of the twin moons, and his voice boomed across the rocky plain. "You think you can defeat me, human?" Drag sneered, his alien eyes glowing with malice. "You are nothing but an insect beneath my boot." Jonathan didn't flinch. He had faced greater threats in his time as president, and he had learned that the most dangerous enemy was often the one who underestimated you. "I am not here to defeat you, Drake. I am here to free this planet." Drake roared in anger, leaping down from the platform to engage Jonathan directly. The two clashed, the sound of their struggle drowned out by the chaos of the battle around them. Drake was powerful, his alien strength overwhelming, but Jonathan fought with a calm focus. He dodged Drake's heavy blows, using the Overlord as a momentum against him. "I have ruled this planet for centuries," Drake bellowed, swinging his massive blade at Jonathan. "You are nothing, a mere human, a failed leader." Jonathan ducked under the blade, his movements quick and precise. "Maybe, but even a failed leader knows how to rally people who want freedom." With a swift motion, Jonathan struck Drake's exposed side, knocking the alien off balance. Drake stumbled back, growling in frustration. Jonathan didn't let up. He pressed the attack, using every bit of his strength and training to push the Overlord toward the edge of the platform. In the heat of the fight, Jonathan caught a glimpse of the resistance forces overwhelming the last of Drake's soldiers. The stronghold was falling, the tide had turned, and the alien regime was crumbling under the weight of the rebellion. But Draco wasn't done. With a furious roar, he lunged at Jonathan, catching him off guard. The force of the attack sent them both tumbling to the ground. Jonathan struggled to regain his footing, but Drake was relentless, pinning him down with his massive hand. "You will die here, human Drake," his voice dripping with hatred, "and your rebellion will die with you." Jonathan gritted his teeth, refusing to give in as Drake raised his blade for the final blow. Jonathan spotted something just behind the Overlord, a weakened support column that had been damaged in the fighting. With a desperate surge of energy, Jonathan twisted out of Drake's grip and slammed his fist into the column with all his might. The structure groaned under the impact, and before Drake could react, the entire platform collapsed. Jonathan rolled away just as the debris came crashing down, burying the Overlord beneath a mountain of rubble. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent, the dust settled, and the resistance fighters stood still, staring at the fallen stronghold. Then slowly, a cheer rose from the crowd. The Overlord was defeated. Karnath was free. Jonathan stood, his chest heaving with exhaustion. Nara approached her, expression unreadable. "You actually did it." she said quietly. Jonathan wiped the sweat from his brow, his gaze fixed on the ruins of the stronghold. We did it, he corrected. The victory was theirs, but the cost had been high. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of fallen fighters, both human and alien. But this was the price of freedom. Jonathan knew that the real fight had only just begun. Karnath had been liberated, but there was still much work to be done to rebuild, to ensure that the people of this planet and others like it could live free from oppression. In the days that followed, Jonathan worked alongside Nera and the other leaders of the resistance to establish a new order on Karnath. It wasn't very easy. The scars of the Overlord Sai's rule ran deep, and there were many who doubted that peace could last. But Jonathan believed in the power of unity and the strength of people coming together for a common cause. Saran remained by his side, offering counsel and support as they navigated the challenges of building a new society. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of leadership felt too heavy to bear. But Jonathan had learned something important during his exile. True leadership wasn't about power or title. It was about service. It was about standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the horizon, Jonathan stood on the same ridge where his journey had begun. The stars still looked different from Karnath, but now they seemed brighter, filled with the promise of a new future. Nara joined him, her arms crossed as she gazed out at the night sky. What now, she asked. Jonathan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. He had once been president of an entire planet, but that life felt distant now, like a dream from another time. He had found something more important here, something worth fighting for. We rebuild, he said simply. We make sure what we've built here lasts. Not just for Karnath, but for every planet under the Alliance's control. Nara nodded, and after that, Jonathan smiled faintly. After that, we make sure it never happens again. They stood in silence for a long time, watching as the stars twinkled above them, their light stretching across the vast expanse of the galaxy. The battle for Karnath was over, but Jonathan knew that the fight for freedom, for true, lasting freedom, was far from finished. And this time, he wouldn't be fighting alone.